All right. So I had a question from last week. You'll have to tell Mark this because he's not here. So he asked me what my references were for the meaning of the name Ephesus as desirable. So that's from Hitchcock's Dictionary of Bible Names and the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia list. They both use desirable as that translation. From what I can tell, Ephesus, which was the kind of the Greek spelling of that, it sounds similar to two Greek words, so there's some contention. One being arestos, which means desirable, and the other epitrepo, meaning permitted. So scholars have proposed that the city may have originally been assigned one of these names, and then over time the pronunciation changed. Given the subject of the letter and the lack of exact etymology, I'm comfortable with desirable. If you're not, that's okay. But I'm comfortable with that because we've got kind of a split on desirable or permitted. There was also a goddess of some form that the name could have derived from. But again, from what I see in the other letters, I'm comfortable using desirable. But it was Hitchcock's Dictionary of Bible Names and the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. So last week we talked about the letter to the church at Ephesus. The Ephesians were commended for many things. They had a good list of things they were getting right. And kind of the whole primary theme of the letter, though, was that they had forsaken the love that they had at first. They were working hard for God, but they didn't have time for being with him. So God does want us to have solid doctrine. He wants us to do things for him, but most of all, he wants us to be with him and to love him and to be devoted to him. So today we're going to be talking about Smyrna. Victoria, do you have those pictures? Yay, don't put anything up yet, but I have lots of pictures today. I kind of went crazy. I love ruins and old things and things that have been around since the time that these people that we're talking about today would have been walking around. So not everything is from that time period, but I tried to find things that had evidence of when things that these people would have seen. So Smyrna is a city about 42 miles north of Ephesus. Today, Smyrna is called Izmir, which they believe is a Turkish rendering of kind of has morphed from Smyrna. It is the third largest city in Turkey. The population is around 3 million. There's 4 million people in the Izmir province. The estimate on Christian believers, which includes Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant, in the city of Izmir is only in the hundreds based on information that I got yesterday. I looked in several places, so it's kind of sad that despite its rich Christian history, there's a few hundred Christians and maybe a dozen churches in a city of 3 million, primarily Muslim people. So there is still a lampstand in Izmir or Smyrna today. If you look at photo number 1, this is a model of what ancient Smyrna may have looked like. You'll see that there's kind of a double harbor. So there's kind of a peninsula, and then there's kind of almost two peninsulas, and water comes in, and then you can see that small little double harbor there. They used to be able to chain it across and prevent ships from coming in. That has now been silted in, so there's no longer that kind of double harbor. But this is an estimate of what it may have looked like, kind of in the early times of this city when it was really thriving. So Old Smyrna was founded by the Aeolian Greeks in the 11th century BC on a small peninsula and was later taken over by the Ionian Greeks. Photo 2. Oh yes, sorry, I'm killing the computer. We do have a picture of a location where the old Smyrna was. There's the remains of an Athenian temple, a temple to Athena there. We've got where they originally had the city, Alexander the Great is credited with the idea of establishing a new city center, which would have been the Agora, at a larger location at around 340 BC. So this is the old original ruins. You can see on the right-hand side, there's some columns still. That was the old temple to Athena. And when you're ready, the next one. This is one of the capstones or the capitals of one of those columns. You can see it's a little more rustic because it's older time period. They get better at chiseling out capitals later on. But again, this is very early. This is 11th century BC is when this was founded. So I'm not sure when the temple was built, but it was, this is really early. Smyrna was absorbed by the Romans in 133 BC when the last Attalid king bequeathed his kingdom to Rome in his will. He had no heirs, so he gave his kingdom to Rome, and that included Smyrna at the time. Smyrna thrived as a major commercial center and trading port under Roman rule. It had a double harbor, as we saw, but the inner harbor has since been silted in. Strabo, an ancient Greek geographer who was born in 63 BC, described it as the most beautiful city in the world. Smyrna was rebuilt by the Romans under Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was his reign was kind of got to the end of his reign in the movie Gladiator. I'm not saying it's a movie you need to watch because it's brutal and violent, but in case you've seen it, that is the same Marcus Aurelius we're talking about here. He caused it to be rebuilt after a devastating earthquake in 178 AD, which would of course been after the time John was writing this letter. Eventually, Smyrna was under Ottoman rule and was the site of conflict during the Greco-Turkish War. A great fire devastated Smyrna in 1922 during the conflict. Again, I'm not going to go through all the history of Smyrna because there's an internet full of information, and we don't have time today to go through everything. But that's a brief overview. I did want to show you the Agora, so if you could go to photo number 4. In the middle of a bustling city, you can see there's the ruins of what was the Agora. It was the central public square. It was the administrative, judiciary, and trade center for the city. Excavations show that in accordance with the legends of the city being moved, again, that was recommended by Alexander the Great, the Agora area was planned and the buildings around it constructed from the end of the 4th century BC onwards. So Alexander the Great had the great idea for it. It was actually one of his generals that did the work in building. This is an aerial view. Here's a side view of some of the ruins. I love ruins. When I was in Israel, I just loved looking at all the old things. Here's some of the columns. You can go to the next one. Again, you can see the detail is better in the capitals. Some time has passed since the Athenian temple capital that we looked at the beginning. There's also large sections with arches. So there was a lot of stalls, so they would have, again, this is part of their commerce. So it was almost like a farmer's market type situation where vendors would come and set up shop. And then there's a special gateway called the Faustina Gateway. You can go to photo 8. This remains to this day, and I have a close-up of the person at the top. This is Faustina. This is the wife of Marcus Aurelius. Again, they helped rebuild the city, and this was kind of dedicated to her. So she looks very severe, right? Yep. Not sure if she was or not. And then photo 10, this is still within this area. This was some Roman baths. So I love this stuff is all from that, especially like this, the Roman bath, the Faustina Gateway and the arch. All these things were what Smyrnan Christians could have seen and walked through. That to me is amazing. There's not as many ruins here because, again, it is a bustling city, so it never stopped being a city. In Ephesus, we have more ruins because there was no people living there. Here, there's not as many ruins because there's a huge amount, 3 million people live now around this area, and they've built the city all around the water inlet. The city is huge now and encompasses all the sides. I have a couple other cool areas that the Smyrnans may have seen. The Kadifikali Castle. I know I'm saying that wrong. I don't speak Turkish. Also known as the Velvet Castle, was built by Lysimachus, who was one of the generals under Alexander the Great, who inherited, again, his empire was inherited by 4 generals. Lysimachus was the one who built this castle in the 3rd century BC. To this day, you can see elements from the Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman periods. This is a picture from 1905, so this is after all of those periods. Photo 12 is the castle gate that's still standing. Some of this stuff was built in later times. Again, you can see different stone layers. And then the tower, you can see all 4 layers. If you go to the next one. So down at the bottom was more of a Hellenistic layer. You got a Roman layer, a Byzantine layer, and then the very top layer would have been during the Ottoman periods. And then photo 14, this is a view of the city today. This is a recent picture of the city. So you can still see the inlet of water. You can see the city now covers all the way around. So it's a very large metropolis today. There's the theater, Roman theater. We have a picture of what it may have looked like. Again, another big theater, not as large as the one in Ephesus, but the Romans built this theater in the 2nd century BC on the slope between the Agora and the Acropolis. And recent excavations and research show that it was expanded during the reigns of emperors Trajan and Hadrian, including the addition of a two-story stage behind the proscenium. So this is today what's left. There's not a lot. It had an earthquake in 178 AD. And they had to repair it and reinforce it. But over time, it gradually became buried beneath the soil flowing down from the slopes of Kadifakali. So you can see they're actually still working on excavations today. And then this is cool. Last thing about the history of Smyrna, but I thought this was amazing. If you'll go to the next picture, photo 17 is Caravan Bridge. This simple bridge that spans the river Meles, the Caravan Bridge was finished in 850 BC and has remained in continuous use ever since. That makes this little bridge almost 3,000 years old, a record that qualified it as both the oldest standing bridge in the world. It actually has a Guinness World Record, and it is also one of the oldest man-made structures still in use today. Obviously, it has been added to over time. This was in 1875, this photograph. And then today, of course, the area around it has changed and have built it up more, but it still retains the original structure underneath. I thought that was really cool. So Smyrna was a center for pagan worship. There was a temple to Zeus at the foot of the mountain to the north of the city. Along the street called Golden were shrines to Apollo, Aphrodite, Asclepius, who was the god of healing, and Cybele, I've heard it pronounced both ways. At the Agora were statues of Poseidon and Demeter. Cybele was revered as the mother of all gods. Her worship was wild and unrestrained, according to the research I was able to do this week. She was seen as the giver of wealth and depicted as wearing a crown of battlements and towers. There's a statue of her, and it looks like she's wearing a fort on her head. Smyrna. But the biggest issue for Christians was not the worship of all these pagan gods. The biggest issues for Christians at the day was that Smyrna was an early adopter of Caesar worship, which became mandatory in approximately 26 AD when the city built a temple to Emperor Tiberius. So the worship of the emperor was compulsory. Each year, a Roman citizen had to burn a pinch of incense on the altar and acknowledge publicly that Caesar was the supreme lord. In return, the citizen would receive a formal certificate that he had done so. This act of worship was a vital test for the Christians. Many who refused perished at the stake or by wild beasts in the arena. It became an even more severe requirement to burn the incense and declare Caesar as Lord during the reign of Domitian, which he reigned from 81 to 96 AD. Remember, he's the one that exiled John. So he cracked down even harder on Christians. Serious Christians, of course, had an issue. There were some, no doubt, who threw their incense into the fire and mumbled their words and went on with their life. But for the ones that didn't, the ones who refused to declare Caesar Lord, because if you declared Caesar Lord, you denied that Jesus Christ was. Those that refused were severely persecuted or killed. So as we get into the letter at Smyrna, please understand the Smyrnans were under fire. Revelation 2, 8 through 11, Let's read this and then we'll break it down. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these things says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your works, tribulation and poverty, but you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. So verse 1, the angel of the church in Smyrna, right? Remember, this is Jesus dictating to John. These are the words of Jesus. These things say the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. So the meaning of the name Smyrna, it's derived from the Hebrew and Aramaic word for myrrh. The Hebrew and Aramaic are slightly different, but more and myrrh, or even the ancient Greek word Smyrna, which also refers to myrrh. While a Greek myth links the name to an Amazon named Smyrna, the more accepted etymology connects the to myrrh due to the city's history as a major exporter of the substance. So myrrh was a fragrant gum resin from a certain tree in Arabia and Ethiopia. It is used in perfumes, incense, and for embalming the dead in the Bible. You can get essential oil of myrrh today. I have some. My bottle is sealed shut because myrrh, when it dries, it hardens. So my bottle, I failed to realize I needed to put some olive oil around my lid of I was going to bring it for you to smell today. It's a very strong tree smell. That's a real rich, sappy smell, in my opinion. But it has hardened closed. I may never get it open again. So, but you can actually get myrrh today. Biblically, it was an ingredient in perfume in Psalm 45:8. It was used as the holy anointing oil for priests in Exodus 30:23. It was a beauty treatment for women. Esther went through in her preparations to see the king. Myrrh was part of the ritual. Primary uses were for embalming the dead and for pain relief. Myrrh is obtained by making cuts in the tree's bark, which stimulates the tree to produce its protective resin. The resin hardens on the tree into teardrop-shaped pieces, which I thought was an interesting phenomenon. They're actually called myrrh tears. They're collected from the tree. It produces its scent by being crushed. Again, we're talking about a church that is suffering and being crushed and pressed. So I love the imagery here of the name. In Matthew 2:11, the Magi present Jesus with 3 gifts: gold representing royalty, frankincense representing priesthood or divinity, in his case both, and myrrh represents suffering or death. In John 19:38 through 40, the body of Jesus was embalmed in 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Considering that myrrh was more costly than gold in those days, due to how rare it was and how hard it was to transport it, this is a profound sign of honor and respect by Joseph of Arimathea. I think he's the one who bought it, but Nicodemus was with him and helped him prepare Jesus' body for burial. In Isaiah 60, however, we find a prophecy regarding the millennial reign of Jesus. Our King Jesus will be presented with gifts of gold and incense. However, no myrrh is set to be presented because Jesus' death and suffering are behind him. The myrrh was for the first coming only. In Mark 15:23, Jesus is offered a wine mixed with myrrh. Again, it had properties for pain relief. So together with wine, it was a narcotic drink. It was often administered by the compassionate women of Jerusalem to people that were dying of crucifixion to help deaden the pain they were feeling. It was an incredibly horrific suffering to die by crucifixion. Jesus refused. He endured the agony of the cross with full consciousness, experiencing every moment of his appointed suffering as the perfect sacrifice for our sins. So the theme of the letter, beginning with the name of the meaning of the name of the church city, is suffering. Very fitting when we read what the Smyrnans were enduring. So we have the title of Jesus being used here is the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. We'll see the theme of death throughout this letter. The Smyrnan Christians were literally facing martyrdom every day. The commendation, verse 9. I know your works, tribulation and poverty, but you are rich, and I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. So, verse 9, I know your works. Jesus knows what we're doing. He opened the last letter like this. I know your works. He says he knows their tribulation. That's a comfort. They're not alone in their suffering. Again, he's in other areas we're reminded he walks among the lampstands. He's among us. Tribulation, the Greek word here is thlipsis. Thlipsis. Oppressing, pressing together, pressure. It's a metaphor for oppression, affliction, tribulation, distress, straits. Please know this is not the great and specific great tribulation. We all shall have tribulation, trouble, and persecution. In fact, 2 Timothy 3:12 says, those who live a godly life in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. So if we're not suffering persecution, are we living a full godly life? I think maybe is the question. We've been in a little bit of a bumper here in the United States. Ralph, it is so good to see you, fresh from surgery. Way to be here, man. That's awesome. I didn't know you were going to be here. All you people having surgery and then coming to church right away, y'all are awesome. All right. We've lived in a little bit of a bubble here, but in no way should we expect that we should just dance on through to Jesus coming back. Regardless of where you stand on when the tribulation or when the rapture will be, we should be prepared to choose Jesus above our life. That's what I tell my kids. I'm pretty confident in when I think Jesus will rapture us as far as in relation to the Great Tribulation. But regardless, Jesus is the most important thing over our life, over friendships, over our job, over all the things. Jesus says to them, I see your poverty. And in parentheses, it says, but you're rich. This is a vivid contrast to what we'll see when we get to the letter to Laodicea, who thought they were rich, but were actually poor in Revelation 3:17. 2 Corinthians 8:9 also parallels Jesus becoming poor that we might be rich. You can read that as on your own time. There are two words for poverty in Greek, pinia. The state of having nothing extra means you can pay your bills, but you're not going out to the movies. And then there's another word, tochia. So I'm assuming the P is silent, P-T-O-C-H-I-A. This is the state of one who has nothing at all. It implies absolute beggary. Guess which one is used here? It's tochia. They had nothing. Again, if a requirement there is to worship Caesar and say he's Lord, you could get a paper. They're struggling. They have nothing. But Jesus says that they're not actually poor because they've chosen what is better. They were really rich and storing up treasure in heaven. True wealth is found in relationship with Jesus. And then he says this very interesting sentence. We're not going to be able to fully dissect it today. I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. I don't know about you, those are not words I ever want to hear Jesus say about me. Who is this referring to? Please remember, this is not the first time Jesus has linked people with Satan. Remember, Jesus having an intense discussion with the Jews, and these are again at the beginning of this passage, it says Jews who had believed him in John 8. He says to them during their discussion, you belong to your father, the devil. That's a really good chapter to read, by the way, if you'd like some extra insight into that, him calling them, sons of the devil, basically. He calls Peter Satan in Matthew 16:23. So this is not the first time Jesus has pulled out, talking to people and comparing them to being either in the synagogue of Satan or Satan himself or children of the devil. What's different here is the phrase, which also occurs in Revelation 3, those who say they are Jews and are not. Some scholars believe this is in reference to legalistic Judaizers, such as those demanding Gentile circumcision in Acts 15. They had the mindset that people had to first become Jews to become Christians, which is not true. They had a whole meeting about this and decided, no, you can just become a Christian or a Messianic Jew. There's these different sects. It's very difficult for us to get in the mindset of the disciples and how they viewed Christianity in those days. They did not view themselves as separate from Judaism. They were considered, there was a lot of different sects in Judaism. For further study on this, Amir Sarfati, who's a Messianic Jew, has a video where he's interviewing a scholar, and they're talking about the early rabbinic Jewish sect that kind of took over. But he talks about how so much of their origin, Christianity, the Christian sect was actually before so much of the rabbinical sect, and he helps lay out who the real Jews are. I highly recommend it. It's a very long video, very rich and deep theologically, and also historically, to understand the mindset of the people of the day. The Christians in that day did not believe they were in a whole new separate religion. These people writing the Bible, Paul, they were not like, we're done being Jews. It was a Christian sect within, so a Messianic sect. So please, I would watch that. It's called it's Amir Sarfati, Who the Real Jews Are. You can find it on YouTube. It was a fascinating listen yesterday, and it would explain a lot better things that I'm not able to fully unpack this morning. But the difference, again, is the phrase, those who say they're Jews and are not. Some scholars believe the synagogue of Satan refers to a group within the ancient Jewish community of Smyrna who were hostile to early Christians. These individuals were claiming to be Jewish but were not, and their opposition to the believers was labeled as blasphemous and an act of Satan. The phrase describes a false or unfaithful religious institution that falsely presents itself to God's people but instead opposes God's truth, a context that has later been used as an anti-Semitic trope. So if you use this verse as a way to hate Jewish people, you are going to have a discussion later. The point I think Jesus is making here is that there was a group of people who were claiming to be the people of God at the time, but they weren't. They thought they were doing God's work, but they were really serving the purposes of Satan. Jesus himself calls it a blasphemy, so it is serious. We'll talk a little bit more about this later if we have time, but it's a much deeper topic than I can get into today. Verse 10, we have the exhortation. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Exhortation. Jesus says, don't fear. It's a phrase used over 300 times in the Bible. Some people say 365. I had a hard time nailing down that exact number. Over 300 times in the Bible, do not fear. Fear is one of the first things that gets thrown into the fire, by the way, the people who are fearful later in Revelation. So that's serious. Jesus says, don't fear. Even though you're about to suffer, some are going to go to prison. And he says, you will have tribulation 10 days. Some scholars believe the 10 days is an idiom for a short period of time. Interestingly, it's the amount of time Rebekah's family requested for her to stay with them before leaving to marry Isaac in Genesis 24:55. It's also the amount of time in Daniel 1:12 that Daniel asks that he and the other 3 Hebrews be given just vegetables and water as a test. My thought is maybe on this. I actually lean more heavily with other scholars who believe that the 10 days mentioned here could be symbolic of the 10 Roman emperors that severely persecuted Christians. These are not contiguous, meaning they did not happen back to back. There were some emperors in the middle. Again, we have a whole council in the middle of some Roman emperors where Christianity is declared the state religion. So this is not this person and then this person and this person. But through a period of 250 years, we have Nero. He saw Paul beheaded and Peter crucified upside down. We have Domitian. Of course, he exiled John. We have Trajan. Ignatius was burned at the stake under Trajan. With Marcus Aurelius, who saw Polycarp was martyred during his reign. Septimus Severus killed Irenaeus, which is an early church father. Maximinus killed Ursula and Hippolytus. We have Decius, we have Valerian, we have Aurelian, and we have Diocletian, who was the worst of all. So 10 total over a span of 250 years. Christians were convenient scapegoats for the emperors. The politicians of the day placed the blame on them for all kinds of disasters, natural and otherwise. 5 million believers died during this period, according to Fox's Book of Martyrs. What's crazy is that in the 20th century alone, we saw more Christian martyrs in that 100 years than we've seen the entirety of Christianity. So 5 million is bad during that 250 years, but we've had it worse very recently for Christians. Right now they're being slaughtered in Nigeria. I'm seeing people start to raise the alarms. We've got to, if you don't follow the Voice of the Martyr, that's a great resource for what is happening around the world. We can talk about our feelings getting hurt on social media, but we have actual people being martyred today, and will be martyred today and tomorrow, and it will continue. Jesus tells the Smyrnans to be faithful unto death, and he will give them the crown of life. Again, the whole theme of this letter is be faithful unto death. Jesus is worth it. Verse 11, he who has an ear, we have the closing, and then we will see one more time, or again, we will see the promise to the overcomer after the close. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. We all have ears. Let us hear the Spirit today. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. This is the promise to the overcomer. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. Jude 12 talks of those who are twice dead, and Revelation 26 references the second death. The message here, if you're born once, you're going to die twice. If you're born twice, you're only going to die once. Martin Luther had a similar phrase written in the margin of his Bible. So again, if we are born and then born again in Jesus, we only have to die one time. If you're only born once, you're going to face not only a physical death, but a spiritual death. So what's missing on your chart? We talked about the meaning of the city name. We talked about the title of Christ. Talked about the commendation. We talked about the exhortation. What's missing? We missed concerns. Jesus didn't miss it, though. These believers were going through it. Tribulation, suffering, jail, poverty, possibly death by burning at the stake or in the arena. Jesus encourages them to remain faithful and reminds them of what is really important. 3 of the tares that were sown into the early church, one was legalism, which denied Christ's completed work. Gnosticism, which was a denial of Christ's humanity, that he was fully God and fully human. And Caesar worship, which was denial of Christ's lordship. All they would have had to do is throw some incense into the fire, say some words they didn't mean, and they would no longer have suffered. This is a temptation we should all be prepared to face. Polycarp was a disciple of John, faced this choice. He was the bishop of the church in Smyrna. The Roman proconsul, on the day that he died, the Roman proconsul demanded Polycarp recant his Christian faith, swear by Caesar, and revile Christ. Polycarp replied, "For 86 years I have been his servant, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me?" The proconsul then threatened Polycarp with fire, and this was his final prayer of thanks to God, declaring, "I bless you, Father, for judging me worthy of this hour, so that in the company of the martyrs I may share the cup of Christ." I have a picture of him from his church. He was burned at the stake, and then he was stabbed when the flames failed to kill him. So this is a Smyrnan martyr. He has his own Catholic church. You can go to the next page. It is, in true Catholic fashion, quite a place. But this is a monument to him and his martyrdom. Polycarp was faithful unto death, and he's wearing that crown of life, my friends. So here we have a letter with no concerns. Jesus says, just keep going. Don't be afraid. Just keep going. Okay? So Smyrna is quite a place. It's got quite a history. And we can learn a lot from the Smyrnan Christians and what Jesus said to them. We have 1 minute. Any question or comment about today? Oh, thank you. Yes, the promise. Oh, I'm crying. The promise in the postscript. I wasn't planning on crying in all these Sunday school classes. The promise in the postscript is promise to the overcomer. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. And with that, I think we're done. Any last chance? Okay, fun. Next week, Pergamus or Pergamum, depending on your Bible translation.